Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hope all of you are doing great. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live, which is about a very special topic investments in revenue cycle management. Now, before we get deeper into the topic, I want to start with introductions. And as we are introducing ourselves, I'll request everyone who has joined, to highlight from where you are joining and what topic would you want us to cover in this session in the chat box. So let's start with introductions. Priya, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Ankur. This is Priya Sadi, Practice Director with the firm focused on the revenue cycle management practice, dialing in from India, Gurgaon.
Thank you, Priya. So, hi everyone. My name is Ankur Verma. I'm a vice president at Everest Group, and I lead the healthcare operations team here. Joining in from Jersey City, New Jersey. So Priya, let's start with something interesting, and I'll take a leaf out of my recent conversation with a client where the client wanted to understand that why RCM should be a focus for anyone, right? And we know that it's a market which is growing at around 12% every year, right? But for you, what are the top three things when it comes to revenue cycle management or healthcare provider industry, which we believe that anyone should focus on?
Yeah, and that's, a question, Ankur, that we are hearing very often right now. So probably, while there are just too many things that we can speak about or what come to our mind when we think of the revenue cycle management as a market, I guess three very important things that kind of come to my mind are firstly, the thinning profit margins that we are seeing everywhere amongst the health system community or the health provider community, all of the things around talent shortages happening, etc., and providers also trying to focus more on their internal functions has resulted into more outsourcing appetite by this particular community who now feels that most of the functions around, say, medical coding or denials management are best outsourced to vendors who specialize in these. So that would probably be the top priority in my mind when it comes to what's really happening in this particular market. Secondly, I also feel that there's a lot of consumerism that even the healthcare industry is seeing as of now. So we are also at times where things such as patient access or what we call the digital front door, or even things such as patient pay estimation, etc., which kind of have a very strong influence in what kind of an experience a patient really carries, is also something which is revamping this entire space. And why, particularly, I want to talk about it today is that because we've done a lot of lip service to the area around patient access, but in terms of real investments, this area hasn't ever been a big priority. However, that's something which is really changing now and is having an impact across the entire RCM value chain. And we'll speak about it further as we continue this conversation. And I guess finally, the third thing that we are also seeing, and which is probably also closely tied to the top two, is that there is a lot more technology adoption that's happening now. Now, some of it also relate to how do you really make sure that the profit margins can become better. You can address the things around consumerism. The outsourcing can actually provide better levers or KPIs to the healthcare provider ecosystem, and hence overall there's an appetite to adopt better technology. So I guess these would be things that come to my mind, but probably, I'll also want to understand from you what are probably those things that come on top of your mind when you think about revenue cycle management in the current scenario.
Sure, Priya.
Sure,
And Priya,
sure,
I'll
Priya.
touch upon
And Priya, I'll
the
touch
buyers.
upon the bias.
Priya, can you hear me?
Ankur?
Sure. So I'll talk about the buyer side of the situation, Priya, right? So if you look at the healthcare provider market, right, in the US, there are more than 5,000 hospitals and millions of patient practices, right? And all of them are suffering from financial pressure, right? So if I look at the enterprise side of the market, there is huge scope for streamlining and creating or improving the efficiency of the enterprises, right? So that's a very big trend in the market, right? Second, if you if you look at all of these smaller patient practices, there is a wave of consolidation which is happening in this industry, right? So The big patient practices are acquiring smaller patient practices. Large health systems are acquiring independent hospitals. So all of that is leading to issues around governance, integration, cost overruns. So all of that also is leading to a churn in the industry where these enterprises are thinking about how can they streamline their operations, what should they do to really become more profitable and able to provide a better experience to the patient. So that's second, I think, key happening from my perspective in the buyer industry, which is happening, which is creating an impact, right? Third, I would say, as enterprises are thinking about what to do, they are also opening to the idea of outsourcing, right? So if you ask me, if I compare, let's say, the number of outsourcing deals that we see in the industry today versus what it was in the, let's say, a decade back, there's a considerable shift, right? We track almost 500 to 600 outsourcing deals in revenue cycle management, and every year we see at least 100 new deals being signed by health systems and patient practices, right? So I think all of these three things which I highlight are leading to an interest in healthcare provider or revenue cycle management as an industry, and I believe that's also driving the growth in the outsourcing market.
Yeah, and some very interesting pointers, Ankur. And we also see that we have a few folks joining in from different parts, India, Texas, etc. So probably I'll also have that question for the people dialing in. When we are talking about this market in the current scenario, what are probably the 2 to 3 things that are on top of your mind, and you might also want us to share perspectives in that area? Uh, Coming back to the conversation also that we were having, Ankur, I think we also we touched upon how outsourcing is increasing, etc. But one more thing which I am also kind of observing is in that there's a lot of change in even how outsourcing is happening. So it might not be wrong to say that overall the outsourcing patterns are undergoing a lot of shifts in the industry. And probably I'll tell you what I really mean by this. If we were thinking about the RCM outsourcing market till a few years back, the focus used to be very much on cost optimization or process improvement kind of things. But as of now, it's not just about how you can reduce some of my cost, but if you can really have an impact on my overall top line growth, as well as if technology is something that can really get shifted because of all of this. So, is this something that you are also observing some shift happening in the overall outsourcing patterns?
Sure. And Priya, that's a very good question, right? So when we talk about outsourcing, we can essentially define outsourcing in any industry in a framework where, let's say, there are three generations of outsourcing, right? Generation one, generation two, generation three. When we talk about generation one, and we can name it, let's say, traditional outsourcing generation, where enterprises focus on cost reduction, right? They focus on scale of operations. To some extent, they focus on process improvement, right? So that's generation one. Until couple of years back, RCM was in generation one. Now let's come to generation two, where enterprises start thinking about automation. They start thinking about efficiency, right? They start thinking about not only cost, but also what impact internally the talent and the expertise of the outsourcing companies bringing to them. So that's the second generation of outsourcing, and what we believe is that RCM is now at second generation, where all of these thought processes are in the minds of enterprises. Now there's a third generation as well, right, which is about transformation. Now, by transformation, I mean leveraging technology, leveraging people, and leveraging process or governance in a way where you are getting the best out of everything. So the question that you asked, that when it comes to revenue cycle management, it's at the second generation and about to move into the third generation, and that's why it's an area where, for outsourcing service providers, there is a significant potential to impact the enterprise industry, and then we'll talk about some of that in the subsequent discussion. But this is where I believe the revenue cycle management as an industry is. Uh, Over to you, Priya.
Yeah, and I agree that while we are coming into that second generation where we are not just talking about some process improvements and cost optimization related things, I guess the one fundamental thing which I also see changing in that second wave of outsourcing is how technology adoption is really coming into this area. And probably I'd talk about what are some of the things that I see are actually changing when it comes to the overall technology adoption. So, when we talk about the data driven kind of an industry, that's something which is fundamentally changing even now, even in the RCM industry. So, you think about anything, be it claims denials or even prior authorization. Most organizations now want to use some kind of data driven insights to see how they can make an impact in the overall decision making things. And this is something that we are seeing across the value chain. And this also kind of relates to things around more platform based adoptions. So while we are still at a stage where we mostly have point solutions across the entire value chain, we also see the integration happening more strongly, stronger workflows coming up, better integration between different parts of the value chain, all of which means that what the kind of data that flows in your patient access side continuously goes to have an impact even on the claims denials and AR management side. So definitely the interoperability impact, etc., is something which is playing a lot more strongly now. And this is also translating into how the enterprises or your health systems are thinking about it. When they are making some of these technology decisions, one of the things which is on top of their mind is how well my solutions around, say, medical coding or some of the other areas can actually integrate with my existing EHRs or clearinghouses, etc. And that thing really becomes a deal breaker for some of these organizations. So, for instance, wherever we have seen multiple EHRs being used and solutions not well integrated to this, you might adopt the best technology, but the outcomes are not really going to be to the extent in which you can really derive the best ROIs, etc. So, I think those fundamental shifts are also kind of coming into this particular industry. Apart from this, I guess within medical coding, we definitely see more autonomous coding also, as well as computer assisted coding coming in. Even within the claims value chain, we see more denial prediction happening more prospectively rather than just retrospectively. So these are a lot of fundamental changes coming in. I guess one more thing that I'll probably bring into the picture is also how some of the big techs are also trying to make an impact here. So if you think about prior authorization, which is still less than 20% of that market is digitized, but because of certain government regulations and how some of the large technology vendors are trying to bring in solutions around this area, even in things like prior authorization, we are seeing more technology adoption come in, which is able to improve the overall process. So, what are your thoughts here, Anku? Do you also kind of witnessing or listening to similar things?
Sure, sure, Priya. So, from a technology point of view, right, and again, I'll divide the RCM into three components, right? The front end, which is patient access, right? Then at middle, you have the medical coding and billing, and then at the back end, you have AR management, right? So the applicability of the technology, right? The penetration of the technology varies by the value chain segment, but you're absolutely correct that technology is really creating an impact when it comes to revenue cycle management as a whole, right? Now, on the front office, right, when it comes to patient access, you have activities like eligibility verification or appointment scheduling, right? So what we are seeing is that many enterprises are opening up to have these patient portal or applications, right, which have automation embedded in that, right? So many enterprises are opening up to the idea of applying automation in eligibility verification and appointment scheduling kind of functions, right? So on the front office, uh, uh, applicability of automation is pretty significant, right? When it comes to the middle office, right, medical coding, you're absolutely correct, right? Things like computer assisted coding and autonomous coding, right? We do see a lot of new vendors coming to the industry, right, helping these enterprises in provided these AI assisted automation platforms for coding, right? Now these platforms do not completely replace the existing coder workforce, right? But they supplement them. So when it comes to the middle office or medical coding, the applicability of AI assisted automation coding platforms is there. Now, when it comes to the denials management and the AR management, which is the back office for revenue cycle management, right? What we are seeing is that many companies are coming up with analytics oriented platforms, right? Those are much more than workflow platforms, because those platforms have data models which can not only identify denials, but they can also predict and send the feedback to the enterprises on what's leading to those denials, right? Is it because of medical coding errors? Is it because of lack of patient data? So I think from a technology point of view, different technologies are creating different degrees of impact across the value chain. But yes, absolutely, it is a big trend in the RCM industry, and that's also leading to investment from not only private equity firms but also from a lot of IT BPO companies, right? And then we'll talk about that in some time, Priya. But from a technology point of view, I think this is my point of view. Uh, I think one topic that we also want to cover is Priya. It's on generative AI, right? Because generative AI is something I think, which is impacting all the industries, including healthcare provider, right? Now, my hypothesis on generative AI is that yes, there are many, uh, I would say, POCs going on in the industry, right? There are many use cases which exist in the industry, but from a live implementation point of view, or a scalable implementation point of view, I am not very optimistic about that, at least in this industry, right? And there are reasons for that, right? If you look at some of the challenges associated with generative AI, right? The data security, right? The ethics around that, right? So for RCM and for healthcare providers as an industry, I think those are some of the issues which I see being a hindrance to the adoption of generative AI in this industry. But what's your point of view, Priya, on generative AI applicability in RCM?
Yeah, so I agree that we need to be pretty cautious when we talk about generative AI, but probably I'll again try to break it down into two areas. One is what are the use cases or the art of the possible, and then secondly, to your point, where do we really see some actual implementation happening rather than just some of the pilots getting tested. So when it comes to the actual implementation, I kind of agree with you that most of the implementation is fairly limited. On the healthcare provider side, we do see some good implementation happening for clinical documentation areas as well as for prior authorization, etc. And these are also some of the low hanging fruits that providers have been quick to kind of grab into. But if you think about the other areas, such as denials prediction or even medical coding, taking the aid of generative AI, there's a lot that can be impacted. However, actual implementation or actual adoption is still in pretty early stages. But I guess when we are thinking about generative AI, we also need to think about the long term perspective and what are the different things that can really get impacted. So, if you think about autonomous coding, which is still not as widely accepted, if you still think about the medical coding or the middle cycle still using technology as a lever, it's in most of the cases is helping the coders build some of those codes as well as help them in assigning codes, but automatically building those codes is still not something which is happening at a widespread level. Or even if your computers or your analytics is predicting some codes, as of now the error rate is pretty can really have an impact, wherein you can really bring in those codes automatically, reduce the error rate to a very good extent. In fact, in similar things on the claims denial side of things, as of now, if you have, say, a 50% rate of predicting those codes which are or predicting those claims which are likely to get denied, the number can really get increased in the future if you are using generative AI for that claim scrubbing or predicting those claims. So those are some of the things which can be positively impacted. But I guess another question which kind of comes to our minds is, for the supply community, what are some of the low lying or some of the low hanging fruits or immediate opportunities that kind of exist? And I guess in that regard, one thing that we see most of the players trying to do is build in some kind of technology on their own. And the biggest hindrance in most cases is again the availability of that data. And since generative AI can help you build in some of that synthetic data, there's a lot better or a faster ramp up of the technology curve that is possible now, because of which there is going to be a higher, it's going to be easier to bring in those platforms and a higher adoption also possible. There are also other side opportunities around bringing those Gen AI related models, LLMs, or bringing in services around data integrity. Because, as you rightly mentioned, we also need to think about the other aspects about data integrity or cybersecurity as we start adopting generative AI more. So, I agree, while it's a double edged sword and we really need to exercise a lot of caution there, but it also brings a lot of good opportunities there. And probably, would also have the same question for our listeners here. When you think about generative AI, what do you think are some of the most pressing opportunities as well as the threat that it kind of poses?
Very interesting, Priya. And so Priya, before we move on to you know investments which are happening in RCM and what's leading to that, uh, I have a very interesting question on technology, right? And it's from a service provider point of view, right? So when service providers are having these conversations with enterprises, right? When they're going to the market with their offerings, with their capabilities, right? Based on your conversations with enterprises, right? What strikes the chord with them, right? Uh, if a service provider is highlighting its technology capability, its technology expertise, do you think that is becoming a key decision making criteria for enterprises, or do you still think no, it has to be driven by cost with all of the other things like technology, process efficiency being just good to have, right? So what's your point of view on this?
Yeah. So I'll say that, technology has become a very strong lever or a means to an end, but the end still remains to be cost. So even if you are taking the technology angle or talking about how you maybe have, so for instance, I'll take the example of some of the players trying to come up with more end-to-end platforms or more integrated solutions or solutions that can maybe better integrate to all the EHRs or practice management tools that are adopted internally, or maybe some good data lakes. But I guess the end of all of this again remains to be the cost lever. So I guess it's also very important to relate how your technology investments or the other investments that you are making are kind of translating into better top line growth or better cost generation for ultimately the enterprises. And I'll actually talk about one example here. So what we also saw for recently, one of the organizations was that they were kind of struggling with their medical coding related things, and the number of days before which they could even send out some of the before they could even send out some of these claims or write these documentation was still 7 days for them, which is actually a very long period of time. Even the coder productivity was not very high in their case. In this particular case, there was some adoption of technology that was done, but I guess the ultimate pressing point with the enterprise was the improvement that they saw in the coder productivity there, which was approximately 40% in this case. Even some of the other software aspects around the case mix index that kind of improved by 5%. So ultimately, it's improving the core business of a healthcare provider to a very large extent. And again, some of the softer aspects, like earlier they were spending, say, 7 days, and now they were spending, say, 3 to 4 days before actually writing those codes. So some of those business KPIs, how they got impacted and had a direct correlation to their top line growth, is still going to be the most pressing factor for your organizations or your health systems when you speak to them. Uh, is that also something which you are witnessing? Okay, I guess Ankur, you're speaking on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. So Priya, I was saying that absolutely, I think you're correct. Cost still remains the paramount consideration for enterprise when they outsource, but technology becomes that differentiating element, right? If you can impact my denials through technology, if you can impact my medical coding process through technology, then that becomes a differentiating element, which sometimes result in decision getting shifted in favor of one service provider versus other. So I completely agree with your thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree that, the way to bring in that differentiation has definitely become that thing about technology. I guess that's also, the precursor to my next observation that I have in the market, which is that generally there's a lot of capital infusion that we are seeing in the RCM market. And all of this has become really rampant, at least in the last 6 to 8 months. So are you observing something similar? And what do you feel are really the reasons behind something like this?
Sure, sure. Priya, you're absolutely correct, right? So when you look at the number of M&As, the amount of investment that has gone into revenue cycle management industry in the last, I would say, 18 to 24 months, it's significant, right? Now the question is that why is it happening? I would say there are three reasons, right? First, when you look at the the total addressable potential for this market, right? Because from an investor point of view, the top priority that they have before investing into the market is TAM, right? So if you look at the TAM uh, associated with revenue cycle management, it's significant, right? Over $100 billion, right? And I'm only talking about typically what we call business process and IT outsourcing. I'm not even talking about the software and the other things, right? So the TAM associated with revenue cycle management is significant, and which is driving investor interest in this market, right? Second point I would say is that even if you look at the current outsourcing spend, right, our estimation is that combining IT services, combining BPO services, and combining some sort of platform as well, this market is around 18 to $20 billion, right? Now that's a significant outsourcing spend for any industry. And not only that, right? If you look at the growth rate of this market, it's growing at almost 12% year on year, right? So a $20 billion dollar market growing at 12%, that will that will interest any investor which is out there in the market, right? So I would say the second point, which is driving capital infusion and which is driving interest from investor community in this market is the current outsourcing spend and the growth. And third, I would say is Priya, if you look at and I compare what was the state of this industry in, let's say, 2018 to what it is now. There are companies which were $50 million revenue worth in 2018, right? Now they have grown to 350 million, right? And their valuation is 3.5x to 4x their revenue, right? For any investor, that's a significant value generation that has happened in the last 5 years, right? So I think all of these factors combining are really, I would say, really getting the interest from investor community. And there are many examples of capital KKR investing into different assets in RCM. So that's my point of view. But any thoughts from your side on this, Priya?
Yeah, good. No, I think I kind of agree. And another thing that kind of comes to my mind is also about what are some of the real things that kind of make some of these assets very interesting. And some of the things that again I'm looking at is that if they have a more comprehensive future portfolio strategy or an ecosystem of offerings that is really more end to end. So, for instance, having a component of more technology related things or having those components of solutions which are better integrated to each other can solve for the interoperability aspects that we just spoke about, and actually have KPIs that kind of resonates better with the healthcare provider community. I guess those are some of the things wherein we've seen the capital infusion happen more in some of these assets, making them a lot more lucrative bet. So, what are some of the other things that maybe you are also seeing within some of these assets?
Sure. So, Priya, I would say if you are an investor, uh, and if you want to invest in RCM, right? And I'll divide the investors into two parts, right? One, the private equity community, right? So if you're a PE firm which wants to invest in RCM, I would say there are three or four things that you should look into, right? First one being for an asset, which part of the RCM value chain the asset is operating into, right? Is it focusing on patient access versus medical billing versus AR management, right? Because that will define the addressable market for me, and that will also define the valuation of the asset in the next 5 years, right? So, as a private equity firm, it's important for me to understand uh, the the current portfolio and focus of the asset. Second, I would say the marketing strategy of the asset is also important, right? Because it's an industry where there are more than 500 companies supporting, healthcare providers, right? So out of those 500, there are a handful of 10 to 15 companies which really have the right message towards the enterprises, where they're focusing on cost as well as also highlighting that from a technology point of view how they're bringing the transformation as these enterprises move towards the generation 3 of outsourcing, right? So the market messaging around the assets is also very important, which any private equity firm should look into. Third, I would say a private equity firm should also focus on the client segment which the asset is focusing on, right? If you look at RCM, you have health systems, right? You have independent hospitals, then you have physician practices. So again, in this conversation we are not talking about what's the right client segment is, but for a private equity firm it's important that they should have a clear understanding of the client segment which the asset is focused on, so that they can create a roadmap, an exit roadmap after 5 years or 6 years of investment, right? So I think that's a third most important thing for an enterprise to for a private equity firm to focus on. Fourth and last, I would say, Priya, look, this is the industry whose backbone is talent, right? So a private equity firm should also focus on that for asset, which are the countries where the asset has delivery centers, right? And what kind of talent it has, right? Does it have medical coders? Are those medical coders certified? Does it have presence in Philippines? From India, what's its delivering? What's its onshore presence? I think those are very important considerations for a private equity investor, when it's investing in a particular asset. Now, coming to the second category of investor, which is, let's say, a big IT BPO firm or a technology firm wanting to acquire a smaller RCM specialist, right? Now, for an IT BPO firm, I think other than the four things I talked about, there are two additional things which they should focus on, right? First, what is the how easily that firm can integrate with the overall healthcare strategy I have, right? For example, if I'm a firm which is only offering, let's say, system integration support or technology support to healthcare enterprises, and if I want to acquire a services oriented a BPO firm, a BPO asset, I don't think that will work, right? So the integration aspect, right? It's very important for a private equity investor who is thinking about acquiring an RCM specialist, right? Second, I would say how complementary, right, are the capabilities of the asset with respect to the current capabilities that an IT BPO firm has, right? For example, let's say if the IT BPO firm has presence in the back office and the middle office side of the market, and it wants to have an end-to-end offering by acquiring a patient access focused RCM firm, right? So it can do that because it will give uh, the IT BPO firm an end-to-end catalog of offerings in RCM, right? So I think in addition to the four things which are important from a private equity investor, these are the two additional things which I believe an IT BPO firm should focus on as they're thinking about acquiring any firm.
Yeah, and some one point that I would actually like to double click on, Ankur, is what you mentioned around the kind of relationships that some of these vendors have with the enterprises, which also qualifies the kind of upskilling potential that they have. So, for instance, you might be deeply entrenched into an account for medical coding, but if you really have firstly that end-to-end portfolio, there's always an opportunity for upskilling, and which again kind of translates into the existing relationship that you have in an account. If it's a more of a value driven relationship, a more strategic relationship, there's definitely a better potential for you to dive into the other areas. Whereas if the relationship is primarily driven by, say, some work which is just based on cost takeout opportunities, that potential also kind of reduces. So I guess those are some of the core elements that we can definitely look at. There's also a very interesting question here from Amshutosh. Maybe Ankur, you want to take it up?
Sure. So, for all other readers, let me first frame the question, right? So, the question from Ashutosh is that most of the RCM companies have internal focus when it comes to internal product development, automation, data analytics, right? Due to IP retention and cost pressure. What recommendation we have for service providers, right? So Ashutosh, I think for service provider there are two strategies or two recommendations we have, right? First, there are processes where enterprises are still very skeptic. They hold back on taking a third party support, right? For example, anything related to care management. It's very difficult for a service provider to support enterprises on those initiatives, right? So their service providers have to play a supporting role, even from a technology development, even from an integration point of view. However, there are processes where the industry has matured to a point where service providers are where healthcare providers are very open to take support from third party companies on data and analytics, on automation. So, for example, processes like medical coding, right, or let's say AR management or denials management. Right? These are the areas where enterprises are much more open to have a discussion with service providers on not only identifying the right technology element but also implementing them. Now, I do want to highlight one point, right? For any service provider, the technology implementation roadmap, it's not a one contract journey. It's a journey which can take 18 months, it can take 3 years, it can take 5 years. So for a service provider, you need to start small. You need to start with one process, deliver the impact in that process, and then move to the others, right? And I'll give you an example. So this is a long-standing client of ours, right? It signed up with a large health system for medical coding in 2018. Now, from 2018 till as of now, the relationship between this service provider and the healthcare provider, the large health system, has increased to 1,500 FTs. And not only that, the service provider is now also enabling the technology transformation of this healthcare provider by implementing a CAC solution, a computer assisted coding platform, and an AR platform as well, right? So summarizing 3 points, right? Start small, take it as a journey, and third, I would say identify processes where enterprises are really interested and confident in taking support from a third party service provider. So Priya, I hope that covers this question.
Yes, Ankur, I think it definitely does. And, we also have another question around what kind of disruptive technology do we really see in RCM? So I guess that's a great question because as we were discussing, there is adoption of technology across the value chain, but which of them is actually going to be more disruptive? So probably I can share my opinions. Autonomous coding, which is still very relatively newer in their maturity journey, and the adoption is very, very in its early stages, but that can really be very disruptive if you think about the overall potential, because it's not just going to help you assign some codes but actually reduce the dependency that you have today on a lot of the manual coding that really happens. So that's something which could really emerge as very disruptive. And secondly, things around prescriptive claims denials or even claim scrubbing. So, the most important issue that most of the providers are still facing is that most of their claims are still getting denied because of reasons that they are able to see only once they are denied. And which also not just means that there is loss of revenue, but also there's a lot of effort that goes into admin related things to see why that claim was denied, to address those things later, and also do those follow ups with the payers. And hence the industry really now needs to shift a lot towards doing those things on a more predictive fashion rather than waiting and spending a lot on the admin expenses. And hence those tools which can do these things more predictably, or claim scrubbers, etc., is something that could prove to be very disruptive for the overall industry. So those are, in my opinion, the two things which could have a very strong impact on the overall profitability as well as the top line growth for most of the health systems.
Very interesting, Priya. And I think for all the audience members, right, who have joined us today, so I would say thank you. And we also have a complimentary report which you can download, which will not only answer questions around uh, the some of the trends in the industry, but it will also provide details on which are the assets, what are their capabilities, and what is their growth roadmap and so on. So if you are a private equity investor and if you want to have a look at this report, this would be very helpful for you. But again, thank you everyone for joining us for this session. I hope we are able to provide you some insights on why RCM as an industry is a hotspot for investment, and what's in store as we go forward in the next 5 years or 10 years. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.